I am the type of person who I'm always kind of I'm a book person. So I'm always kind of keeping my eyes out for things that kind of pop up on the radar of spiritualism or mediumship or things like that. And a few months ago, I started seeing this letter to a young medium being either suggested or kind of popping up here and there in different groups. And I started looking at it, and it intrigued me. The title itself intrigued me, but I was just kind of drawn to it and read some of the reviews, and I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this. So I bought the book. I started reading it, and it was one of those books to me that was really special in the way of there's a ton of books out. Well, maybe not a ton, but there's a significant amount of books that are the mechanics that are sort of geared towards development, but there aren't a lot that sort of get into maybe the philosophy behind why we do what we do as mediums or spiritualists. And it wasn't done in a way that was over intellectualized. It was very much based in your personal story, but yet as you're reading, there's these nuggets or these light bulb moments where you say something in such a way that it clicks. And even if it's something that you already knew, it sort of reiterates it in a way that kind of hits the soul differently than it did maybe the first time you heard it or came to that conclusion. So I want to say, one, I really, really appreciate this book and am so grateful that you wrote it. What kind of inspired you to tell that story?
You know, it's funny. You're kind of you're tapping into it really well. I think for me, growing up in the Catholic Church, I never felt like, as a gay person, I never felt like all of me got to go through the door. Yeah. So when I came out at the age of 15, I had these really lovely drag queens that just really received me. They became really a family to me. And I was kind of I've always been kind of a goofy, awkward, nerdy guy, so I always felt badly for gay people that they had to claim me. I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I know I'm not cool in any way, but I would look terrible in a dress, but please, let me hang out with you. It was a little bit like that. And as much as I'm joking, as I'm actually completely serious in a certain way, actually. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, when mediumship started happening when I was working in hospice, I knew that I wanted to write a book that was, not preaching anything. I wanted to make sure that I was being true to my experience and not trying to build my authority, because I didn't want anybody to read the book and think, here's another person that's so spiritual that they don't belong on the planet and they're so special and different from everybody. And those kind of books are kind of a turn off for me, because I think one of the things we struggle with in mediumship is the idea that this could happen through someone like me. Because someone like me is all of us. And I'm not special with that. It's all of us, isn't it? And so I wanted to write a book that also kind of acknowledged the lessons I've learned in my work as a teacher and my work in life, and with my partner, Mark, dying. I wanted those things to be captured in a way that was sincere and vulnerable and not fancy. I didn't want to do anything to make them inauthentic or weird. I think you understand. I'm okay with being messy, because I think mediumship is messy, and I think spirits want to tell us about how they were messy while they were here. And I think if we get too fancy and spiritual, I think sometimes we can't tell the full breadth of a story of a spirit in some ways. So,
very much. You used the word vulnerable, and that is exactly, I think, the thing that I really resonated with about it. It was very vulnerable and very transparent in the way of, I'm owning my humanness, and I appreciated that very much. I think it's a book that anybody who's working in that realm should read. But I think too, and maybe this had something to do with the title, I think this is something anybody just kind of starting off in this path should maybe read as they start off. Because one of the things that kind of drew me to the book in the first place was the title, being that I'm in my early 30s now, but comparatively to other people who do this work, I'm usually the youngest person in there. So I'm like, okay, letter to a young medium, that's interesting. But you kind of mean it in the sense of not chronological age, but sort of where someone may happen to be in their development. Is that correct?
Yeah, Travis. And I think what I was also trying to inspire there is that we're all young mediums, because sometimes the way we describe ourselves in the comparison, I think we forget that we're all trying to figure this out, aren't we? And so we're all young mediums. That's kind of the intention there, that we're all developing, and nobody really arrives. We're all in the process. We're all in the river together. Kind of, we're all in that journey together. Yeah.
Yeah. There's, it's interesting the time that this book sort of crossed my path. It was right at the sort of the height of the protest and sort of the upset around like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And there was something that just kind of struck me, because as I was reading, each chapter kind of is a little bit of a story and a lesson. And there was, I believe that the chapter title was Mediumship as a Form of Social Justice. And there was a particular part that stood out. Give me just 1 second here.
You bet, Travis.
You said the real consequences to racism in all its forms, and until we as mediums, there are real consequences to racism in all of its forms, and until we as mediums care more about the profound hurt and long-term pain of being disregarded, we will never be able to truly honor the wisdom and dignity of our sisters and brothers of color. It's not about making assumptions regarding the hurt or only highlighting the challenges people experience. It's about seeing and honoring the internal wisdom and perseverance that some roads in life require. And when I read that, it just kind of slapped me in the face, because, I'm a big history person, especially when it comes to sort of the history of spiritualism. And you think about how those early pioneers were sort of on the leading edge of, ending slavery and equality and feminism and all these sorts of things. And yet when I would look at other people and other colleagues, it's like they were deadly silent about things that were going on. And it really makes you think, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough to be an ally? Knowing that we'll never be perfect, but that we can always try to do better. And you told this really beautiful story around Dorothy in that particular chapter, a spirit communicator by the name of Dorothy. In the book, at least, you called the spirit communicator Dorothy. You were at a class and someone was dismissing the communicator. Could you maybe tell that story a little bit?
Yes. It's such an interesting experience for me. It's very painful because so basically I'll tell the story kind of as a little bit how I unfold it in the book. But I sit down with this fellow medium, and we're in this class and it's on platform. And the teacher talks about how platform development really is an extension of what you're doing one-on-one, what you're doing in your individual work with folks. And that was incredibly helpful. And so we're working one-on-one with folks that morning. And the person I got assigned to, she sat across from me, and she kept telling me about her training. I always feel kind of like the goofball in the class. Like, I've never been to the AFC classes, because we couldn't afford them, and it was just anyway. There was a sense to me that I was in. There's no drama there. That just wasn't how I was trained. That's not how my development occurred for me. But she was telling me that she was a natural medium and that she had been trained by the AFC network for 5 years and was just very advanced. And as we sat down to do our practice reading, and that's how she started, was telling me, how effective she was in the work. And she started to describe a little bit about what Dorothea looked like. She described her skin color. She described a little bit about what she looked like. And I mean, very little, not a lot, by the way. And then she said, well, I have no idea why this woman is here. And then she looked around in the room thinking that some random spirit had just magically landed there. And I was like, I think I know who this woman is, but maybe you can come back. So I just kept trying on it, literally, because I'm a big believer that as mediums, we have to be really good sitters for our developing teammates. You should never be a crappy sitter for a fellow medium. I can't stand that. That kind of I have high standards. I'm like, that's not having high standards. That's being a jerk. Yeah. So we have this accountability and this expectation for evidence, which we should, right? But we can love each other into that evidence. So that's always what I do. I always find a way to place the information. That's always my intent. So we kept having this back and forth, and I would try to give her some guidance and say, I think I know the spirit is, and she would interrupt me. And she just kept saying things like, I don't need your help. Did I tell you I've been doing this? I was like, oh gosh, calm down. So I just got really small, and I become kind of an introvert in situations anyway.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of listening to her go back and forth. But then it got really ugly. Like, it got really ugly. When she finally accepted that this woman could be part of my journey, then she assumed that she was our housekeeper. And I was so devastated. I thought, I cannot believe you missed this opportunity. Dorothy is one of these lovely souls. She kind of put me back together sorry to get emotional, but kind of put me back together as a kiddo. And, you think about it, such a lovely soul. We grew up in an African-American neighborhood, and we were one of the very few white who after school every day. And she fed me, and I became part of her family. And on Sundays, they would take me to church. And she became a life force for me. She became a family. I mean, their family just embraced me. And her husband didn't. Her husband was always kind of irritated with me. I actually write about that, by the way. There's another essay I've written about him, which is kind of funny. Because when I was in Selma, crossing the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, I came to understand why he was the way he was with me. But I don't want to get too sidetracked about it. But anyway, I watched her, and she just could not understand that this woman could belong to me and that I could belong to this woman. Her mind could not allow that. And she missed it. She just missed it. And we all miss things. So the key here is not to make the student terrible into a monster. That's fine. But I just know as a white person, her racism got in the way. And as a white person, my racism gets in the way sometimes. So I'm not above this lesson. I mean, it would be arrogant to pretend to be. But my intention there was really to describe, just in a small way, right? Because here I am, a white male, having this experience that clearly was very hurtful. And you can just imagine our colleagues of color sitting across from them doing readings like that. The hurt that we're sometimes inflicting on our colleagues is so unacceptable.
Yeah.
And if we don't get wise about that with our colleagues, I mean, my gosh, with our colleagues, if we don't start getting wise about that with our colleagues, how can we ever really create a sacred spot for spirit to communicate that's not white? I mean, what an incredible limitation.
Yeah.
So say, my soul says whites only, because I refuse to abandon my privilege enough to understand your hurt, to understand that your experience might be different from mine. And I think as mediums, I don't think I actually believe it's our responsibility. We can't be casual about cultural competence in our work. I think it's actually a requirement. And I think in our community, we need to create an expectation that people doing our work that call themselves professional mediums, we need to create an expectation of some cultural competence around what that looks and sounds like, because we can harm people profoundly.
Right. Right. Do you think that, I mean, I'm sure there's many, many different factors and facets. Do you think that this is a big piece of it, a generational thing? Or do you think, people in general, but specifically as mediums, is there anything that we should be more actively doing, whether it's a practice or reflection or whatever, that can sort of help us address those biases within ourselves?
Well, see, I mean, Travis, you clearly have a wisdom about this, just by the way you're communicating and the heart you're offering it. You're the first person that's ever asked me about this. And many interviews I've done for this book, you are the first person to ask me about this. That's why you can see how vulnerable I got talking about it, because I've not been asked to talk about it, not once. So that means a great deal to me, by the way. No, I think, it's interesting. I think the moment we identify that we have a bias and that we have work to do, everything changes. Yeah. Just by being curious about our limitations. And then I know I've had white colleagues that have said, well, what about reverse racism? No. And I'm always like, no. We're not going there. Like we're not having that conversation, not ever with me. Because that, it's first of all, it's abstraction. It's not true. And second of all, you can only oppress if you have power. The actions of people of color that may be perceived as violent by white people is often a response to hurt.
Yeah.
When white people are being racist, we're protecting our privilege, our unearned privilege. So those motives are so different, aren't they? So if we get wise about that, then we can get really courageous, and we can start to look at how we walk in the world, and who do we open our heart to? Who do we not? If you're walking down the street and you see a group of African American men or Latino men, and you retract in any way on the inside, own it.
Yeah.
You can heal it. That's it. That's what I do, is when I walk in the world, I notice when I retract, and I own it. I don't say it's their fault. I don't say, I don't excuse it. The excuses are, I'm done. So my good friend Kim, I'll never forget this, Kim Ortiz. In fact, she's in the book too. She's maybe she's not in this one. I can't remember. Anyway, we're in the water at some point, hugging manatees. That's a weird chapter. That's not this. That's going to be in the next one. Sorry. Okay. That's a funny way to segue. Sorry, Travis. Sorry you interviewed me. It just makes me laugh that we're like in the water and we have manatees hugging us. But that happened. It was lovely. Anyway, but Kim Ortiz and I were in Memphis, and we're there for work. Got on this trolley car, and coming from Colorado, we definitely have racism. It's our racism. We're more polite with our racism, but it's still racism. I mean, we can dress it up, but it's racism. But anyway, in Memphis, it was more obviously divided there. There was a more obvious physical division there. So on this trolley car, all of the African-American men were on one side, and all of the two white women and the white man were on the opposite side of the trolley car.
Oh, wow.
It was so weird. It was so weird. It was so weird. So my friend Kim is so smart about these things. She had this big thing of donuts that we were bringing to the meeting, and she just walked over and she sat with the men of color. Now I'm going to call on myself, because I like to do it. I like to tell the truth about things. What I did is I walked on, and my immediate reaction was, without thinking about it, was to sit next to the white woman.
Yeah.
Her immediate reaction was to very intentionally go and sit next to the African-American man, the older African-American man, and there were two men across. And she just started talking with them. And it was such an interesting thing. And I said, well, why'd you do that? She said, my way of overcoming my inner racism is to always sit next to the person that my parents told me to judge.
I love that.
Yeah. It changes everything, doesn't it?
Another thing that I was kind of curious about is you are very open and transparent about the fact that you're gay. I think most male mediums, at least that I'm aware of, are gay. I have my theories as to why I believe that is. But I'm curious your take on that, and if you think that it plays a factor in your ability.
You are asking the coolest questions, Travis. This is so cool.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I've never been asked this question. It's funny because I get told by a lot of people that they're like, well, why do you always reveal that you're gay in the first 5 seconds of meeting somebody? And I finally gotten courageous, and I start telling people the truth of why. I tell them because I don't ever want them to assume that I'm not. Not once. And the reason for that is I want to ensure that any LGBTQ sister and brother watching me do this work knows that I'm on their team. It's really, really been a big deal to me, because for me, it's a way of letting them know that I see them and they see me. I'm not any authority in any of that. It's just a way to let them know that we belong. I mean, how many times in spiritual circles have we been told that we're wrong or perverse or not included? We only got to bring parts of ourselves into the circle for so long. And so what people think that it's so cute, actually, Travis. People think, oh, Brian's not comfortable with being gay. I was like, sure, that's fine. That's fine. I always think that's actually really cute. I'm like, sure, I'm really insecure about being gay, except not even a little bit. But and the reason why I mentioned that before, I'll explain why I think there's a common factor there for us. It's interesting. I'm a big believer that our mediumship is like a thumbprint. It's like a fingerprint, isn't it? We're all unique with our work. Yeah. And so the ways in which we've been hurt in the world actually create a vulnerability that allows us to connect to spirit. That's how I've always believed. And it's not unique to being gay, because, I mean, but you mentioned a very interesting pattern, because it certainly is, isn't it? But there's a permission too, because when you identify as being gay, all of a sudden the world lets you use different adjectives, and we're given more permission to express our emotions in different ways. So there's a permission there that I want to acknowledge too. There's a gift there, actually.
Yeah.
But can I ask you, Travis, so that's my little goofy answer. I want to know what you say about this. I'm much more curious what you have to say.
Yeah, no, I guess I've always just kind of thought, in one sense, kind of, very similar to what you were saying. I think people who are sort of on that spectrum, we're kind of on the fringe. Sometimes I think those on the fringe, it's very much, we're neither here nor there. And I think oftentimes that mirrors what we do in mediumship, with our awareness kind of being partly here, partly there. Like you said too, I think it presents certain challenges that give us the ability to empathize because of our experience and put ourselves in another's shoes. And then I also think too, it was really interesting. A few years ago, I was looking at this study where they were looking at the brains of gay people, and they were finding neurological similarities between heterosexual women and homosexual males' brains, and the same with heterosexual male and homosexual women. And of course, we tend to think of women as more right brain, more feeling oriented, and we have to, that feeling, that's that foundation. If you don't have the emotion, all the evidence in the world is just going to be lifeless. And so I don't think that being psychic makes one more prone to be gay, but I think that being gay can sometimes put us in touch with the elements that may make us more intuitive. You'd mentioned too, you have a really interesting perspective on that. I was born in '89. You were young at sort of like the height of the AIDS crisis, and so you've gone through that, and then you've lost a partner. Do you feel like that kind of, not only as a person but as doing the work that you do you think that prepared you, or was almost like certain things that you had to experience to do what you do effectively today?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Travis. I remember in 1992 being at the March on Washington, and it was a big LGBT rights march, at the time. And it's interesting because the focus then was actually on more access to HIV medicines for my brothers and sisters with HIV at the time. Mm. And it was also about fighting Amendment 2 in Colorado, where I'm from, because it was a really horrible amendment that the people of Colorado voted for, by the way, to prevent us from having any civil rights in any area. I mean, it was just this large, sweeping, ridiculous law. But I remember it was such an interesting thing. My roommate, Jim, he got it arranged for me to be part of the unfolding committee for the AIDS quilt. And it wasn't because of anything special I had done. He really managed the food bank for the Whitman Walker Clinic and was just a beautiful, beautiful soul. So I think he really, as I look back on it, Travis, I think he gave that honor that he was offered to me. In fact, that's who Jim was. I'm sure that's what happened. But anyway, long and short of it, I'll never forget watching these piles of the quilt. They'd be all folded, and when you'd unfold it, you'd grab a corner and you pull out, and you'd lift it and you'd walk 45 degrees, put it back down, reach back in, grab another corner, pull it all the way out, walk in it, put it down. And we did that a couple of times. There were a lot of unfolding groups. And all of a sudden, Travis, I looked around and the entire Washington Mall was covered in the quilts. Mm-hmm. And I remember being on the edge of that quilt and thinking, all of these beautiful souls cannot just cease to exist. And so I think for me, that became that moment is when I had to befriend death. I resisted everything about death. I was scared of death. I was frightened of death. But in that moment, it began a journey to befriend death. And I think that's when mediumship, because I was working in hospice as a family therapist, and that happened also in a really bizarre coincidence. I didn't seek that work out either. So I think the AIDS epidemic had a huge impact on my calling in the work, and but I also really honor what you said about the images of the brains. I've never really felt, as a gay man, because some people will separate gender and sexual orientation as separate things, and I honor that. There's wisdom in that. I don't dishonor that. But for me, I've always felt that my how would I say this? That my gender identity really is not cis male in any way. I've never identified with that. And I don't identify as female, but I don't identify as male. It's hard to explain. There's this weird, and I know we talk about that as maybe being in the middle or what have you, but I think it's more complicated. I think sometimes our labels create the confusion, actually.
Yeah.
But I've always felt that my soul is more, it can really be both. I can embody, because most of my close friends are women. Mm-hmm. And so I think I just think that communicates something. That says something, doesn't it? So, but how do you feel about that, Travis? Is that true for you? I'm making an assumption about your sexual orientation. I hope that's okay.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I have never felt, I've never felt not male. But I've, like you said, I've never been the stereotypical male. I was always the more sensitive, I wanted to be in the kitchen with my mom and her friends, getting the gossip instead of like out playing football, that kind of thing. So I think, there is, how do I want to say this? It's such a weird time that we're in, because kind of like with what we were talking about with race, there's such these layers that are being peeled away. It's like, especially like you were talking about with having understandings about the difference between, physical sex and gender being more of the mind, and there being variations with it. And I don't always understand, but I want to. And I don't ever want to like look back and say, wow, that was really ignorant of me, that space that I was in. I remember, growing, when we didn't have phrases in our vocabulary like transgender or cis or things like that. And so, my earliest idea of maybe someone who was like trans was on Jerry Springer, was a spectacle. And it wasn't until I had a friend transition from male to female, and it really allowed me to like pull it apart, that I realized that I had some really messed up ways of thinking about gender. So, that in itself, I feel like I've come a long way with, and I totally support. I think for me, where I'm still seeking to try to understand better, to be a better ally, is gender queer, or feeling no association with gender, period, no matter where that is on the spectrum. That's very hard for me to wrap my head around, because even though I've never felt like the traditional male, I've still always identified as male and felt comfortable in that identification. So having this body is a weird thing. It really is.
Yes. But I think that's a really cool thing you just said. The way you wrap that up was really beautiful, because I think as mediums, we're given this really unique perspective that I can't hold for very long, because I'm not Buddha, not even close. My husband will tell you I'm like messy and sloppy and self-centered and all those things. But I think what's fascinating is in mediumship, we really do understand that a lot of the attachment to me being Brian, or me being gay, or me being in this body, that's the part of me that does not live on. But the memories and the lessons of this body, this name, this story will live on. Right. But starting to understand that the soul is so much more complicated. And I don't claim authority on any of this or try to get smart about any of it, because to me, that's where I think we can actually go astray. I just think just the curiosity about that can open up so much for a person in their own spiritual path. I never try to define that path for someone, because that feels like I'm stepping on their authority. But I do find it fascinating that we are more than our name, So.
Yeah. You mentioned your partner. How is he with the work that you do, or is it even a factor?
Is being gay a factor?
Your mediumship. Is it a factor within your relationship? Did you have to have like a Samantha and Darren Stevens moment of like, honey, I'm a witch kind of a thing?
Kinda, yeah. It was a really cool thing actually, because John's a math professor, but he's pretty open-minded actually, and I think the moment where I felt like I needed to address it with him was when I was scared of it. It was a little overwhelming, and it just all started happening, and it was it was happening everywhere all the time, and it was like that for about 6 months. I always call that my crazy time, and it really was kind of crazy, but it was lovely in its own way. It was kind of miraculous, and I didn't feel like I was even on the planet fully. It was a little weird, but anyway, during all that, I sat down with John, and I was like, by the way, I'm a little crazy already. You might be aware of this since we've been together for a while. He's like, yeah, we know that. It's duh. It's just kind of cute.
Yeah.
And I said, I think I'm called into mediumship. And he goes, he just gave me that look like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, let me explain. I said, well, do you give me permission to work with you a little bit around this thing I've been practicing? He said, oh, yeah. He's just really open. He said, sure, why not? So his uncle that I'd never met came through, and he just revealed himself, and he showed me where he passed, and he talked to me about why he was so closed off from the world, and how he also identified as being gay, but he never had the courage to come out about it. He never married a woman. And Travis, it was like having one of our ancestors come through and teach us, the footprints that he created in the world, we got to walk in because of him. And he paid a huge price for that. But we got to benefit from his really painful journey. So it was very moving, but it also gave John a sense that it wasn't nonsense. Right. And he had other loved ones come through that I didn't know. And it really was helpful because he's very honest. There's no pretend with him. It wouldn't be a situation where I could, play make-believe with him and he would go along. He would have zero patience for that. Because I think we both kind of feel that, mediumship is a journey of vulnerability, but we're working with people who are grieving, who are more vulnerable than they've likely ever been in their life. And so if we pretend to be something that we're not, the harm that we could provide or the harm that we could place on another person is really terrifying, actually. And that's why he was always very supportive of this being evidential and this being coming from a place of sincerity. I think you understand. I think everybody in our work understands that perspective. It's not unique, frankly.
When you first started having experiences or awareness of spirit, what was the first, where was the first place, I guess I should say, that you went to try to explore that? Was it a person, a place, a class? What was your official sort of intro into developing?
Well, I didn't believe in it, as you know. This really incredible medium named Deb Shepard, she's local in Colorado. She's really, really, still to this day, I think one of the very best, whatever that means. I don't really like to do the comparison thing, honestly. But for me, she's just really, really highly effective in her work. And I think we can acknowledge it that way. But anyway, when I finally got the courage to go sit down with her and do this reading, because this friend of mine at work told me after I'd met Deb at this function at Denver Hospice, Deb Shepard came up to me and she said, you're a medium too. You should be doing this professionally, blah, blah, blah. I completely made fun of her. I thought it was ridiculous. And I went back to my office, and one of my colleagues that I did the bereaved spouses group with one evening a week, she had tears in her eyes, and she was in the doorway of my office. I said, what's going on? She said, you really hurt me yesterday. Your comments about Deb were really, really unfounded, and you have no idea the kind of work she does. And she is the reason that I got through the death of my son. Mm. And so she said, if you won't go to Deb's office for you, go for me. So I finally got the courage after a couple of months to reach out to Deb, and Went to her office. She gave me a really, really great reading. My friend, Scott Jackman, who had died, it was very, very like a father figure for me, who died of AIDS, another dear, special soul. And then she turned to me, and I'll never forget it, Travis. She's really funny. She goes, "Okay, smart ass, it's time for you to try." I was like, okay. Like, that's not what you think of spiritual leaders. I mean, most people have stories like, lotus flowers blooming, and mine started with smart ass. And I was like, of course it did. It just makes sense in a way. But she said, "I want you to feel a presence of an animal, not a human. And I want you to feel the presence of an animal in the room and let them communicate through you." And I was like, okay. I was like, really seriously. I was like, and I told her, I said, "I can't do this." And she said, "Yeah, I appreciate that your mind tells you can't do that or can't do this, and I don't really care. So you're just going to do it anyway." I was like, she's this kind of person you just have to kind of obey because she's so cool and you want to like be around her all the time. She's a little bit that kind of person.
Okay.
No, like, no joke. Deb is freaking cool. You'd love her. She's so cool. Anyway, she said, "Just put your head down and tell me what you feel." So all of a sudden, it was so fast. I just put my hand on my heart, because that's what I do. It's how I always have done this work. I just put my hand on my heart. It gets me to quiet down, and just natural. Just put my hand there. And I had the presence of this dog, and I kept feeling like, I kept seeing it had like a lion's mane, but the body was shaved. And I kept feeling like he's like a big teddy bear. And I kept saying that it's a big teddy bear, big teddy bear. And you've gone through a big loss recently, and this dog is in bed with you a lot in spirit. And this dog just wants to really thank you. It was just literally, this whole thing just kind of flowed, And I'm sure not all of it was accurate, because I don't want to pretend to be the perfect medium, because that's nonsense. Nobody is. But she looked at me, and she had tears in her eyes, and she went to her daughter's room, because her office was right next to her daughter's room. She grabbed this little silver frame, and on the bottom of it, it said bear, and it was a picture of a chow.
Uh-huh.
And I'll never forget it, because it became real.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to know from you, when was that moment for you? When did you know this was real and not a pretend pursuit? When did this become real for you?
So
is it okay that I'm asking you too? Is that okay, Travis, if I ask you stuff?
That's perfectly fine. I started having, I guess in a way, when I look back, I could pinpoint experiences for as long as I can remember, scattered. But it really kind of came about, at least the psychic side of it, as not something that I intentionally tried to do. I thought I was just sort of I don't know, being playful, being silly, pretending, making things up, predictions up, things up, and then it kept being right consistently. And I'm like, okay, maybe there's something to this.
Wow.
But when I was 16, I'd sort of started having these experiences and realized that I could do stuff, even though I thought I was just making it up at first. And I went to a psychic fair, and the woman who very first time I'd ever been to anything like that, I sat down and she goes, you're going to be doing this, and you're going to be doing that, and you're going to be doing readings. And I'm like, this woman is high, because I was painfully shy. And I ended up sitting with her and talking for like 2 hours. And even though, there was part of me that couldn't quite wrap my head around this extroverted idea that she presented, it still sort of rang true within me. And she kind of took me under her wing for a little while. And, but I didn't really, at that point in time, I hadn't had what I would consider almost like a two-way communication with spirits. I may have seen something or had a thought or an image or whatever, but it never felt like a conversation until I think I was in my sophomore year of high school, and I was taking a test, and there was just sort of this rush of energy to one side, and these memories and thoughts and pictures that I instantly understood to be my teacher's deceased father.
Wow.
I didn't want to.
Wow.
I knew that she was a very conservative Christian, and I didn't want to share that with her, because I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be awkward. I went to the bathroom. I had a panic attack. I was like, I don't know if I can handle dead people, but it stuck with me. And she ended up having that particular teacher. Her sister was also a teacher at that school. So I gave the message to the sister who wasn't my personal teacher, because I thought this way, if it gets awkward or I'm wrong or whatever, then I don't have to have this person like every day and, in class. And she was able to validate those things that were said. And so I was like, okay. But I didn't like it, to be honest with you. I was just sort of into more of the intuitive side, more of just the psychic element of things. And it wasn't until really 2012 where I quit resisting it, and kind of dived headfirst into the anxiety issues that I was having and confronting maybe the cause of that. And it was then where I had one reading in particular. I moved back from out west. I was living in New Mexico. I left a very toxic relationship. I came back home and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was like, okay, Spirit, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. And do what you know. Do what's natural to you. And this woman contacted me. I knew she wanted to connect with someone who'd passed. I'm like, listen, this isn't my forte. I don't feel comfortable calling myself a medium because then people are going to be expecting that. And when it happens, it's a fluke. And, but even to this day, so we had this sitting and it went beautifully. And it was just all kind of a blur. But there was this shift within her where when I left there, I was actually like so spacey. I ended up hitting a pole on the way out. But it just proved to me like this person was not the same person when I left as when I got here. And that's the important part. It's not about me being uncomfortable. If I have to make myself anxious or uncomfortable for a half hour, 45 minutes at a time, I can put my own shit aside if this is the outcome, if this is the results. And that's when it kind of shifted for me.
That is a very moving story. And it's also, it proves to me that you need to be, and you already know this, by the way, I'm sure you already know this. You'd obviously be a really, really lovely writer, and you likely already are. But the way you told that story, what I love about it, you do really have to put aside so much fear and so much worry about causing harm, but worry about our identity in the world, there is so much there, isn't it? It's almost like coming out. In fact, I frankly don't think it's all that different. But I love how you honor that, because I think that's a part that we don't honor enough with people that are new to mediumship. We don't honor the courage it takes to say yes. And also the courage it takes to begin to recognize that you don't actually have to earn the seat next to us at lunch. Because there's sometimes a story that somebody has to go out there and be the perfect medium for 5 years before they can feel like they belong. And I'm not a fan of that.
No.
I don't believe in that. I think people need to be embraced. I think we need to let people know that they're not alone. And we spend too much time alone. See, I think before those words come out of our mouth, we had to have a big inner life. And many of us dealt with issues around suicide, feeling separate, feeling disconnected, feeling like we didn't belong. These foundational aspects of our journey, we as mediums can do this differently. We can reach to one another. We can begin to create the seat for people before they arrive, rather than giving people the impression they have to earn it, or that they have to prove to us somehow that they're worthy enough, as if we have the right to even ask that of someone.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean I don't have high standards. I think people can take this to crazyville with me, because sometimes people think, oh, well, Brian doesn't care about evidence. And it's like, yeah, you're right. All these clients just call me and I just say, aren't you lovely? That's why they come back to me.
Right.
It's just nonsense. But if the way we get evidence and the way we connect with spirit is through vulnerability, why would we make that vulnerability more difficult?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, actually.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's been kind of a shift in my work. And this actually reminds me of another question I'm going to ask you next. But, oftentimes when you're in development classes or whatever, and you're early, teachers like to sort of instill kind of this structure, whether it's the cert or, step 1, 2, 3, who is it, 3 pieces of evidence, move into the mess, all that sort of stuff. And sometimes that can be helpful if you're feeling stuck. But when you just sort of like, this is the essence of the person, let me blend with it and unfold the story there, then there's even better types of evidence that come out naturally than if you were to try to say, okay, what was your name? How tall were you? What was your favorite food? And it's funny when you were talking and you were talking about sort of coming out in the work that you do, it's like when you come out as, like, you can come out as gay and people are like, okay, but then you try to come out as a medium. No one ever asked you to prove that you're gay. But, people always want you to prove that you're a medium or prove that you're a clairvoyant or whatever. It's just a weird sort of broom closet kind of thing.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. That's really fascinating. I love that.
But there was,
I hope you're right, Travis. I want to buy your book.
we do.
I mean it. And I'm not saying that with any, I mean, that is so thoughtful what you just said. The sense that we make people prove it, don't we?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you don't get to sit at our table until you prove it. We don't do that with people that are gay or in other areas of vulnerability, because identifying that you're a medium is an act of vulnerability and courage, but we don't acknowledge it that way. We acknowledge it as prove it.
Right.
That's really cool. I love that.
Kind of reminds me of, it spurred this other thought of something that I really loved when I was reading your book. You were describing a conversation with a friend, and her name slips my mind, but basically the point of the conversation, it was surrounding a medication that you were needing to be taking or
Angel.
to be taking, and I think you said something to the effect of, or she, I should say, said something to the effect of, do you view your mediumship as like, I'm trying to find the word that she used, flimsy? Do you view it as
Fragile. Yep.
Yeah, and to me that really hit home, because I remember thinking, and I've always been very open about my struggles with anxiety and depression. Way back 8 years ago, when the doctor wanted to put me on medication, thinking, is this going to block my ability to do my work? And that question, like, do you view your mediumship as that temperamental, really made me pause and think, because so many people are always like, you got to be vegetarian and you can't smoke and you got to keep your vibration really high. And it's like, well, no, that's a part of you. There's nothing that you can do or say that's going to take that away. So I really loved and appreciated that point that you made. I guess I have two more points, and then I'm going to let you get to your Star Trek. Two more things. One is, what would you say to someone who felt that they may have mediumistic tendencies, had experiences, came to you and they're like, where do I start? What is my first step? What would you tell them?
Well, I want to go back to what you were saying about Angel, because I think it's important. My friend Angel died, I think it was maybe 2.5 years ago now. And she died really suddenly. It was a really, really tragic loss. And she used to say to me that, it really goes along with her question, by the way, but she would say that, Brian, you spend so much time thinking about the ways to describe how broken you are. And mediumship is forcing you to look at all the things you think are broken in you and to see them as part of your instrument. And that changes everything. So being ADHD my entire life, that was always a big burden, for teachers, for parents, for everybody down the line. And yet in mediumship, my ADHD-ness really helps. I think it's partly why the work is comfortable. It's partly why it works for me, actually.
Yeah.
So, when you think about depression and anxiety, if you've ever watched a Long Island Medium, and I've only watched a couple seasons, and I'm maybe different than a lot of other mediums, I respect her a lot. I think she's lovely. I think she comes from a good place. That's, who cares about my opinion about that, but I just have always respected her a great deal. Every single thing that we've carried around as a wound, or that we see as something broken in us, now you get to the world of mediumship and it's all of a sudden this strength of yours, or this gift of yours. And I think that's a huge shift. I think the things that were getting in the way for me at school and things, all of a sudden were the reason why mediumship was more natural and comfortable for me. Not perfect, as I mentioned, but it was also, there was something natural about it for me, as it was for you. So your anxiety actually it serves you in your work. Your depression serves you in your work. I think that's just miraculous.
Absolutely.
So in terms of helping somebody when they're in that initial stage of the calling, I always tell people, don't ever let someone else decide if you're a medium, because they're going to be wrong. Don't ever give someone that power. Never.
I love that.
You find this, you go down this path to discover if this is your calling or if this is something you're meant to do, but don't ever give another person that kind of power over you, ever. We're too comfortable being the authority for another person's destiny. And frankly, I've had people that have come to work with me that have been told they're not mediums. And a couple months later, and it's not because of anything magical I'm doing, and they're just like, it's nothing special about how I teach. But I stand for their intention, and I don't give up on their intention. And I don't put them in the box of not a medium or a medium, because that's nonsense. I actually think we all have access to this part of us.
Yeah.
It's always been my belief. I don't believe that it's carried on a genetic line. It's never been true for me.
Right.
So if we all have that potential within us, then part of our job is to hold the potential of a person with great care, kindness, and grace. Not in a way that's insincere, where we're collecting millions of dollars from them as we're helping them discover that they're not meant to do this. That's different. If we know that this is not a person's calling, then I think it's wise to assist them to find their calling in light. Maybe it's to be a healer, intuitive, there's many other ways to be of service in that way. But I actually believe every person has access to this. I really do.
It's funny because the spiritualists like to argue, are mediums born, are mediums made? And, there's different arguments for why they do different things. But at the end of the day, I love that you give that permission of nobody can make that decision for you. Nobody can tell you that but you, because we do see that a lot,
Yes.
where people, you have the light around you, but you don't, or
Yes.
you performed well, but you didn't. And, and it's just ridiculous. And sometimes I think, maybe the old mediums used to say that because they were afraid of someone getting their piece of the pie. I don't know. It's just ridiculous. So I love the permission that you give. You had mentioned, I guess, partly I wanted to just kind of say, given all the craziness of the world, protests, the coronavirus, all the weirdness that 2020 has brought, one, is there anything in particular that you think people need to hear the most? And two, I believe earlier you mentioned a second book. Is that something that's in the process, or is that like a done thing?
It's actually, this is so funny, I have not mentioned this to anybody, but it's meant to come out in this conversation because it did. So it's not like it's some big secret that the world's waiting for. I mean, I'm not a really well-known medium in any way, so it's not, I'm not well-known in that fashion. But no, but the book, my plan is to put out a book called Halfway Through the Woods, Essays or Real-Life Fairy Tales of a Medium. I think it's going to be the title. My friend came up with it. I think it's really fun. It's kind of fun. But there are going to be all these essays that really wouldn't fit into a letter to a young medium kind of book, because I'm doing another letter to a young medium book. And that one is, again, it's just going to further the lessons that I've learned in the work. And that'll be, my intention is to put that out in January. And my intention is maybe to do that every year. And my goal over time is to include other people's essays and to do encourage other people to write their stories, because we don't want to. I just think it's important, actually. I think it's important that other stories that are not written by white men that are gay are written. So I think it'd be an interesting thing and this is something I'm working on with Colleen Byram, inviting people to tell their stories. And our plan is to do a writer's workshop, because I used to do writer's workshop when I was a special ed teacher, and inviting people to develop the craft of the writing and not charge them for it. Have them come together and just craft the writing, and then create a published book with their piece in it, but not charge them to publish it. It would just be, it's just part of the thing. And we might donate the proceeds of it to some cause that we would all care about. Because I think it's important to continue to expand the diversity of the voices that are writing, so that anyone coming into this calling can have their story honored in the dark. Because I'm a big believer as a writer that I'm writing to the version of me that was in the dark, that didn't think I was lovable, didn't think that I mattered, didn't know that my suffering had meaning, and didn't know that I had a purpose. And so if I can write to that person, that version of me, I feel like I'm doing work that matters.
Well, it's beautiful. I love that. I look forward to it so much. I got so many like light bulb moments, reading Letter to a Young Medium. So I think that's great. And I love that it's not about, with you, it's very humble in the way of, it's not about, here's my spotlight and sort of letting other people kind of stand in their power.
So Travis, before we go, can I ask you a question? Is it okay?
Sure.
So, what about the book for you? Not so much about me as the author, and it's not a fishing for compliments question, but really from your heart, I'd love to know for you, what part of the book spoke to you? Would you say, which lesson or aspect of the book spoke to you?
The one aspect of it overall that I really loved was that I could find myself in your shoes, in your voice, because these different lessons, even though the scenario looked different, we could all find some piece of that we've experienced. So the ability to really sort of empathize and put yourself in that first person perspective while reading it, I think was very profound. To me, I don't even know if there's one or two specific instances that I could really point out. I just know that it was like a game of connect the dots of the way that you wrote it really just put words to maybe thoughts or feelings that I had that I didn't quite know how to articulate. And it was very validating, because even after, we build our websites and we put our qualifications and stuff on there, but I think we all still struggle with, wow, I had a shit day. Am I supposed to be doing this? Am I really that great of a medium, or have I just been flying by the seat of my pants? And it's like, it really sort of humanizes the work, and that to me spoke volumes.
It means a lot to me, because Travis, in your development as a writer, I think that one thing I learned in my writing is to trust the reader. And so what I mean by that is I had to delete a lot from that book. After every lesson, I had like 2 or 3 pages of what I wanted you to get from this lesson, blah, blah, blah. And I had a really lovely friend that said, she was really funny. She goes, wow, you don't trust your reader. You're just going to tell them exactly how to feel about everything you've just written.
Okay.
And I think that was a real gift for me, actually, to trust your story, because I'm learning in my life that the most important things I have to teach others are the ways I stumbled out of the dark. And the rest is mostly nonsense that I think I have to offer. I mean, it's a lot of that kind of crap. But if I'm telling my story and I'm being true to it, and I'm not casting me as the hero and everyone else as the villain, if I'm holding other characters with the same grace as I am myself, I feel like we can find this space, this truth. And I can't wait to read your writing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
The word that you said that really resonates with me the most, and I think that this sort of encapsulates the essence of the book and who I've experienced you to be in this conversation that we have, is that word grace. That to me just really like pops out when you said that. And that I think is that's where healing takes place, within the grace. So I appreciate you so much. I'm so grateful for your time. I saw you earlier today, and I'm like, oh gosh, I hope I don't talk him out tonight, because I know that he had another interview earlier today, and but I'm glad that it worked out, and I've really enjoyed connecting with you and your energy. You're absolutely lovely, and I look forward to sharing this conversation with the world.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Travis.
You're very welcome. I will stay in touch. Go enjoy your evening. And let me know, is it Live Long and Prosper? Is that Star Trek?
Yes, it is. And I can't do it to Live Long and Prosper. Oh my gosh, I'm officially loving you that you could do that.
You have a great night.
Okay, you too. Take care.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you, Travis. I can't wait to get to know you better.
Thank you.
So,
Absolutely. I agree.
take care. Good
Good
night.
night.